Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Choose Inclusion. We're continuing our Black Voices Matter series, and I'm here as usual with my co-host Mike and Yubi. Hey, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Good morning.
So we have a special guest today, Regan Byrd. I actually met through kind of the Women of Color networks of Denver, and I was impressed with her right away. She's the founder of Regan Byrd Consulting, and what makes Regan unique is that she does anti-oppression consulting. I'm going to let her describe exactly what that is. But it's such a needed space and place to be, and I'm so glad that she's doing this. But at first, I want to welcome Regan and ask the question that we ask of all our guests. Just how are you doing right now?
Hi, Nina. Thank you so much for having me on today. And I am doing mostly well. Definitely it's ups and downs, but I'm very fortunate um, to I get to express my emotions and my interests and my passions and my reflections. I get to put all of that into my work. So I have an outlet, I feel like, for a lot of just processing that a lot of folks are doing. And while other folks, have to put that away when they're going to work or have to put it away to deal with like family concerns or get more practical tasks done, I get to kind of spend the day in my head. As I'm doing trainings and consultation, or I get to, offer just discussion sessions like, hey, come talk with me about this. And I have an audience of folks who want to engage with me in that sort of work. So I feel fortunate in that way. And yes, definitely ups and downs, but doing good today.
So, what is anti-oppression consulting?
So I would say anti-oppression is basically a lens on which to analyze the world is one way that I put that. And it's analyzing power and how power has been kind of used and concentrated around identity. Um, so there are multiple oppressive systems that have operated globally. You have racism, you have sexism, you have heterosexism and homophobia, you have ableism, ageism, etc. Most of these systems serve kind of what an ultimate oppressive system, which one might call classism, or this kind of this gathering, attempting to gather resources and retain resources only for yourself or your group, to the detriment of others, to your community and things like that. So anti-oppression is really about why have so many systems and community structures all across the globe been dehumanizing? Why have so many of them attempted to extract resources from a community rather than enrich the entire community? To me, it's a very powerful way to look at human harm, human suffering, and why that has been so commonly caused in a lot of our societies. So that's kind of what I think of as anti-oppression as a whole. And then my anti-oppression consulting business is I do diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting through an anti-oppression lens. So my core theory of anti-oppression and how I present that work, it's designed to say the reason why diversity, equity, inclusion is important is not because it makes you more money, is not because it's a business trend. It's because it actually is about stopping harm that's coming to marginalized people. So I want to teach diversity, equity, inclusion through an anti-oppression lens so that folks really understand the root values of why we're doing this work.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think that point of getting to the root cause and the root values of all this, to me, is what's important. And I think that's the education and the knowledge that people are missing,
Mm-hmm.
like about what's going on. So I love that lens because it's not performative, right? It's not about a press release.
Mm-hmm.
How, how do you respond to people who, aren't following up those performative actions with actual action?
I think those folks have to examine examine their motivations, and also they have to learn how to do allyship well. So one thing I tell folks is that allyship is a skill that you are building. It's something that you have to learn to do. There's a lot to understand about how do I go about being anti-racist? How do I go about dismantling oppressive systems? That is not like, it's actually naive to think, oh, I just know how to do that. I'm going to just, well, we need to protest and it's about me having the right opinions, and no, I treat everyone the same and I care about people, so I'm just going to show up in the world in an anti-racist way. No, 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 no. That's not how it works. This is, you have to learn how to see where all of this is happening. So that's a whole skill set you have to build. You have to learn how to basically strategic plan and create actionable goals on how you are going to dismantle these systems. You have to learn how to build up new systems, new ways of doing things, so that you're not repeating oppressive patterns and ways of setting up things. It's a lot of work. And so some folks are performative out of ignorance, I would say, and some folks are performative out of their motivation is really just to be seen a certain way or to be understood a certain way, and not to actually, again, reduce harm, not to actually end suffering, not to actually contribute to their communities. And they need to do examination on that. Like, if all you care about is how you are perceived, then that's a problem. You're not really doing allyship. And if you're not aware that that's what you're doing, there are skills to help you examine what's going on internally with yourself there, but you have to sit back and question, why am I doing the things that I'm doing?
I'm
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
sorry, Nina. I love what you're saying. I'd love to get your take on. We talked about this just prior to going on air. So, how do you feel like what's going on now can really be sustained? And I love what you're saying about creating allyship, because I actually feel like that seems to be, they may not be calling it by that name, but it almost seems like that's what's happening at this point in time, based on, George Floyd and Breonna and all the other atrocities. I feel like more of that kind of conversation is being verbalized. What are your thoughts on that?
More of that conversation in terms of allyship and how to take like substantive action.
Yes.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think I don't know yet is my kind of actual answer, because I'm worried that we are on the cusp of a new way to communicate with each other, new ways to organize with each other in terms of technology and stuff like that. But I'm worried that the energy around this is not going to be sustained. And what I mean by that is, I was saying this before we started the podcast as well, that we've been here before. We've been here before multiple times. We've been here in the 1960s. There were multiple incidents of international outrage at anti-Black racism in the United States. There were people getting shocked about photographs of police kneeling on women's necks. I use a photograph in one of my trainings, and there's one used in the I Am Not Your Negro, that documentary about James Baldwin. You watch this stuff from the past and you're just like, exactly the same outrage, exactly the same shock has happened. Like, I didn't know it was this bad and I didn't understand this. And basically, what's frustrating is that Black people have never stopped, in this country, talking about anti-Black racism, talking about our lived experiences. And it only seems to be when we are suffering and bleeding and dying in the streets, in public, and it being documented, are other folks like, oh, wow, I guess this is serious. And then there is a period of outrage, there's a period of action, there's a burst of energy, and then it kind of fades away. And I'm worried about that happening now, because of, with the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement is it is still here, but it has not turned into organizing yet. Hollywood has not made a lot of a lot of impactful changes in terms of the way sexism shows up in the industry. Neither have most organizations or businesses, and it's almost like we can only focus on one thing at once. Like, we need to be focused on racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and a couple of different really major things all at once. And it's almost like we are being made to compete to say, well, we're going to focus on racism now, can't focus on some other things. So it's really, really complicated. And I guess I'll end my point by saying, I hope that something has changed and something is different. I'm waiting until after the election. First of all, because either way that goes, there's going to be some decisions that need to be made immediately. Um, and but if Donald Trump in fact loses the election, um, I am also concerned that people will think that that is some kind of victory towards systemic change, and it's really not. The systemic change is going to come after we fix all the things he's done, after we reorganize states and national governments to solve multiple crises, to solve the pandemic, to solve or at least how it's showing up in the United States, um to solve racism, to fix things structurally. We have a lot of work to do, and I don't want there to be this, okay, we did it, this is over, we won the election, and we're going to take a sigh of relief. I think folks are tired, I think folks are stressed, and that has some risks in terms of the work being sustainable. I am very conscientious of that, and I'm trying to basically do my due diligence to make sure that folks understand this is long-term strategic planning work. This is not, a one-off burst of energy and then we're kind of done.
That's a great point. One of our guests earlier, Keisha Washington, she kind of made the analogy that, the work that we're doing is a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. And, what we have right now is just a lot more people have joined in the race. The question is how many of them are going to stay in it, or are they just going to drop off after the next mile? Mm-hmm. And, one of the questions I have is like, so you have a solid understanding of the historical context of everything that we've seen before. We've seen this, kind of short-term action in the past that's faded away quickly. What's different about this time? Or is there anything different about what's happening this time around versus in the past?
I'm certainly not the only person that has said this, and it's been a take that I've heard from multiple intellectuals and public figures that I respect as well. But I definitely think the pandemic put us in a different mindset. Not only has the presidency of Donald Trump revealed so many flaws and structural, checks and balances, like issues that we have with those things structurally in terms of how our government works. But then the pandemic it reminded all of us, yeah, our quote unquote economic stability is for the most part an illusion. Most people, even if they are somewhat stable, are two paychecks away from not being stable. We had massive unemployment. Everyone's health insurance has been tied to employment. Without Obamacare, which now the Trump administration is trying to remove, so a bunch of people lost their health care in the middle of a pandemic. A bunch of folks didn't have rent, and now we have a homelessness crisis that is still pending because a bunch of these folks are still talking about they intend to evict, and all we have is a bunch of evictions that are on hold. None of this structurally makes any sense. None of this speaks of a society that is doing well, that is taking care of its citizens. It's always been there. We've been talking about it for a long time. The conversation just in Denver about homelessness and talking on and on about it being a public health crisis, and this is not a humanizing way to treat people. It doesn't make sense in every possible way you can think of it. Doesn't make sense socially, doesn't make sense economically, doesn't make sense in terms of human care and harm reduction, doesn't make sense any way you look at it. The way in which we allow people to simply suffer for the economy. And so I think the pandemic laid that bare. I think the pandemic revealed that to some people, reminded people where they actually are, and basically said, this is not working. Our government's not working. Our society is not working. Our economy is not working. The U.S. is not working. That is the headline of the century. The U.S. is not working, and we kind of have never been working. It's kind of always been an illusion. I ask people to think about, when exactly did we become a democracy? Was that when we first formed and only 10 to 20% of the population could vote because you had to be a white male property owner? Was it when women got the right to vote in the 1920s and that was only some women? Was it when Black people got guaranteed our right to vote and had it actually protected in 1965? We've never been a democracy. We've never had our stuff together. So we need to start sitting with what we actually are, our real history. There's a lot of great stuff too. There's a lot of resilience. There's a lot of conversations about justice and equity. The US is a country that was founded on a conversation about justice. That is a part of our legacy too. It's powerful as a part of our legacy. The Declaration of Independence as a part of our legacy is powerful. So we have a lot of good to build off on, but I'm sick of this avoidance of our history and what we really are and have been. This is the time to now be like, yeah, actually, we're not doing so great. America is not number one, hasn't been for a long time. We have some work to do to fix this country, to make it what we aspirationally have always claimed it's been. Let's make America actually America. Let's actually make it, quote unquote, the shining city on the hill, to quote a Republican who had aspirational visions. Let's actually do that, instead of all of the oppression and all of the harm and all of the stuff that we've always actually had in this country.
I mean, that everything.
Bravo. Like
I
how
mean,
how do you respond to that? Wow.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it's going to take. I 100% agree. Like and so let me ask you this, because you said something that was interesting and which I totally agree with, which is that we have to take on all of these movements at the same time. Do you think that shifting the conversation now to include the other marginalized groups, do you think it's time to do that and to start bridging the gap between LGBTQ, Native American, Hispanic, Asian? Is it time to start bridging the gap and bringing these movements together, or do you fear that will take away from the one marginalized group, the Black community, where if we can make change there, we can make change for everybody?
I think it's a yes, I understand what you're saying. I think it's a yes and kind of answer where we need to be intersectional and also focused on some major systems of oppression, one of which is racism, and the floor of racism is kind of anti-Black racism, if that makes sense. There's a hierarchy of race, white supremacy and whiteness is at the top, and then the floor of racism in the United States is anti-Black racism. So all good anti-racist work should be prepared to be, let's bring an anti-Black racist lens to this, or understand how this shows up even within communities of color, things like that. So we need to be racism, I would say patriarchy and sexism, because I agree that we are not talking enough about that. I see, feel that, understand that, and see the way it shows up in other kinds of organizing where no one really wants to sit with, this is a foundational oppressive system as well. And then just really in terms of the levels of violence against indigenous communities and trans and gender nonconforming communities and kind of the LGBTIQA community as a whole, that is again a really folks are dying in these communities. That's why we need to be attentive to, I would say, those four, especially right now. And we also need to be intersectional in terms of, if you, like, for instance, if you're not an intersectional feminist right now, if you're not bringing an intersectional lens to your analysis of sexism, or your analysis of homophobia and the ways like queer folks of color have been especially targeted. You don't understand the totality of what's happening and what's impacting communities. You don't understand the folks who are most directly impacted by a lot of these systems. So it's no longer, I guess what I want to say is it's no longer acceptable to not be able to use an intersectional lens. You need to be able to put that hat on when looking at who is really being harmed, who are the constituencies who are most at risk, and are we really being community wide, as the Chinook Fund talks about, in the groups we're trying to impact. So if we're talking about Black Lives Matter, that also means Black queer folks, that also means Black trans women. So I'm so happy that we had, a huge march all across the country. There were several marches marching for Black trans women specifically. That is what bringing an intersectional lens to this it means. Within these four major systems we need to look at: racism, sexism, heterosexism and homophobia, and then indigenous communities, which is intersectional analysis too. Looking at those kind of major things, we can be intersectional within those, to say what are the things we need to be attentive of, who's getting the brunt of this kind of harm. So I think we kind of have to be sophisticated in our approach. Part of the problem I also think has happened with diversity, equity, inclusion and other things is we went to this very simplistic lens on what is happening. And I'm trying to complicate things. I'm just like once you understand the complication of something, then you can back it out and make it simple and narrow it down and talk about a simple pattern or something. But starting simple when something is really deeply complex, I think we did ourselves a disservice in terms of, anti-oppression trainings, activism. We tried to make the narratives a bit too simple. Like, this is just about treating people nicely. This is about everyone has value. This is about let's all share and be nice. And no, it's about a lot more than that.
Well, I actually appreciate you saying that. And one of my thoughts with, kind of today's environment is, I know you've made the comment that, businesses are looking at it from, can they make more money? And yet at the end of the day, the only way for movements to keep sustained effort is through resources, organizations buying in and actually spending money on this. And I'm really encouraged to see, Google and Netflix and the biggest companies out there saying, yes, we are committing, hundreds of millions of dollars for, for Black-owned businesses, for Black Lives Matters. Like, I think that's a huge part of this narrative to keep it sustained.
Well, also Facebook just lost $7 billion because of the boycotts. That's like huge.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really, Facebook needs to be regulated first and foremost, and then they need to fix their own, a lot of internal stuff, and how they externally are running their platform. And yeah, but Facebook is not a good actor in terms of public information right now.
Absolutely. And I think
okay.
Go ahead, Regan.
Oh, I was gonna, well, I'm curious about that, but I was gonna respond to the importance of kind of money in the movement, which I believe Mike was talking about. But I wanted to hear your thought real quick.
No, I want to hear your thought.
I'm just curious about how this is landing for y'all in terms of how it's showing up. But resource distribution is very important. I want to make sure that when we say I'm committing $1 million to a Black-owned business, like, do you know that like the Black Lives Matter Foundation, quote unquote, which is not connected to the real Black Lives Matter movement at all, they got like $1 million, and people had to get, or $4 million got committed to them or something, and then companies had to back out and move money away to say, oh yeah, sorry, we didn't know that wasn't the real thing. So I want to make sure money is actually going to like Black owned and run organizations. What counts as that? What is their definition to that? How are we keeping, and they're committing to money? Is there a way that we can actually know where the decisions about how to distribute that are going, and then are Black people directing where that money's going? So it's one thing to commit it. If Facebook's saying we still get to decide, not Facebook, I mean other organizations, if they say we get to decide where it goes, like that's what an anti-oppression analysis is to say, really, you should be handing over the money to the community so they can decide where it goes and what is the most important to go to. But yeah, commit the money and give it to directly affected community-led kind of organizations and businesses that are contributing well. So I want that to be a part of the conversation too. But redistribution of resources and providing resources for the labor that it takes to do this work is absolutely critical. And it doesn't just have to be money. It can be space, lending space for meetings or time, especially, at the point which after COVID, there's going to be more meeting space needed. Cooking food for meetings, donating individually to local grassroots organizations yourself, or to individual or to folks running for office, or individuals who are activists doing the work. All of that contributes to folks being able to do this labor in a sustained way. And I want to make sure that when we say money is going to the work, what do we mean by that? Let's make sure it's being directed by the community itself, and it's not just organizations saying we are going to give money to what we think makes us look better and we think is not too radical or supports our narrative. Really, they don't even need to be that involved in the decision making. Say, we commit $1 million, here you go, we're going to give it to this organization that is, or maybe in a foundation or something that is a community-led foundation that can distribute the money, or in a way where the community has power to dictate where that money goes, where it's most needed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, yeah, there's this knee-jerk reaction to just throw money at the problem, but if you're not doing your due diligence to find out exactly who you're giving that money to, then your money's not going to make it the impact that you want it to make. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you kind of laying that out for everyone to hear and really think about what they're putting their money towards, because I know that that's the reaction a lot of people and businesses too are thinking about. So let's hold them accountable to do their due diligence and make sure it's going towards communities and community leaders that are truly focused on the Black community and Black leaders in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So Regan, I was wondering if you just had any final parting thoughts for us before we wrap up, something that you want to make sure everyone in our audience hears from your perspective.
I think we as a society have to start setting some baselines, is the word that I always use to describe it, like some core agreements about how we're going to conduct ourselves and do our work. This notion that greed is unchecked, untapped greed is good, that every person can be out for themselves no matter how much harm they do to other people, that it's about like that you matter much more than other people, not even that you matter more, that you matter much more, like that you know that basically that it's kind of like people who just like say things like it's a dog eat dog world and really live their lives in that way and really mean it. How we've allowed businesses and for-profit capitalism to conduct itself, to say, yeah, like you don't have to care about harm to the community that your business is housed in. We are only even going to legally require you. All you have to think about is shareholder profit. All you need to think about is maximizing the benefits to your business, and that can mean harming employees, harming your community, harming the environment. The United States specifically has been stuck in that thinking for a long time, and so I feel like we have to create a whole new social contract and construct for how we, what we say is allowed. We need to have a harm reductionist perspective. We need to have a justice perspective. On those things need to be foundations upon which all of our institutions and ways of operating are built. And if that scares you, or you're like, that sounds like some totalitarian one global government, blah, blah, blah. No, that's what harm reduction is I do not want any system that limits people's freedom, that limits justice, that causes harm. So if you're concerned about something, I'm saying, tell me your concerns and let's co-create something together. That meets both of our needs. That does the best we can do. It may not be perfect, but we can get 95% of good systems working in ways that are beneficial for everyone. I believe we can do it. It's been done before. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but it's time to actually do this work. All of the United States, so I'm saying this to all of the United States, we have to actually do this work. And it sounds big, but we will break it up into bite-sized pieces, and that's what strategic planning is. So yes.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. And Regan, thank you so much for bringing your passion today, your vulnerability, trusting us with, giving you the space to do this. It's been amazing having you as a guest, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank
And
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you to all our listeners as well. As usual, you can listen to this episode on our website, chooseinclusion.com. We also put it up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.